Talked to Kalen DeBoer. We talked to Chris Peterson. If you missed either of those interviews to get ready for tonight, you can go find them at seattlesports.com, the Seattle Sports app, or wherever you get your podcasts. And the guy who's going to call tonight's game, fresh off calling the Seahawks game last night, is Kirk Herbstreit. And Kirk, just want to say, first of all, thank you. You've just been incredibly generous with your time this year with us, and just appreciate it. What a crazy Seattle stretch you're in right now.
Yeah, I'm loving it. A lot of fun last night. You just knew with the way they had played at Thanksgiving and really the way they played, recently in the last 3 or 4 weeks, that everybody's talking about, where's the identity offensively, and look at the schedule ahead of them. You knew that they were, as we say, kind of backed into a corner, and they'd show up and play well. Is it going to be well enough to win? We'll have to see. But I wasn't necessarily shocked that they competed and had a shot to win that game. It was a heck of a battle, man. Came down to the end, and we can sit here and second guess things, which is what I guess we do, But of course, I'm sure your calls and people are wondering, how do you not block Micah Parsons on the biggest play of the game? And sometimes Brock could tell you. I mean, obviously they did a pretty good job on him most of the game. And they walked Curse, the safety, down, and I think that may have affected the communication up front. And instead of Lucas kicking out, because there's no way DJ Dallas can make that block coming all the way over from the left side. So just a miscommunication. It's just the worst time it could have come. But overall, man, Gino was spinning it, and I think you guys are getting a little taste. Brock, you already know what Jackson Smith and Jigba can do. His ball tracking is. It will be, I think, eventually people see at elite level, even by NFL standards. And it's good to see DK get out and make a play early, and just couldn't close the deal, man. But they competed.
Well, I really enjoyed you and Al for 2.5 quarters, and then Clete Blakeman took over for the final, when Al turned over the broadcast to the white hat. That was great.
I know.
How many times do you sit there? Yeah, how many times do you sit there, Kirk, and just some of the wisdom, and then of that, just fun snark that will come out of Al's mouth in those moments like that.
What's great about Al is, like, he's to a point where he just doesn't care, so he can say things that the rest of us maybe are thinking, but you just don't say, and so you just kind of high five him. And and again, I every time I do an interview, I try to tell people, because I've gotten to know Al. That's probably been the most fun. And again, Brock, you know what it's like. We're out on the road. You go to dinners and things like that, and you're in production meetings. It's not just you work with somebody, they go to their room, you go to your room. I guess it can be like that, but in our crew, and I'm sure yours as well, I mean, you get to know the person. We intentionally go to dinners and, get into conversations about family. And so I really enjoyed getting to know him. And I try the best that I can. That there, how social media is. There's like a narrative because of I think he did a playoff game last year with Tony Dungy at the end of the year. I was done. I just worked with Amazon. That game was on NBC, and they did it the first round. And it was not the most emotional, passionate call. And so people use that, and then take a comment that he made during the Indy-Denver game. It was a terrible game with Matt Ryan and Russell. And he made a comment there, and all of a sudden it's like, Al Michaels hates Thursday Night Football. It's like, man, you guys, if this were true, I'd be like, yeah, he does. I mean, he's called every big game there is. He cannot stand it. But it's not true. So he's having a ball. We were just grateful to have a shootout and some points last night. But as far as him making some of those snarky comments, it's just his personality. It's his sense of humor. And, we on our crew, you should see what he says about the hotels, in the meetings. I mean, he says things that the rest of us like, yeah, say it again. He does not care. So we have fun with it.
Well, so let me ask you this. You mentioned the calls that we were getting today. And, yeah, some of them were second-guessing that final fourth down call, et cetera. But honestly, Kirk, the biggest calls and the most common we got today are really kind of going after the head coach and wondering why this team is still struggling with some of the same problems it's had for the last number of years. And in my view, sort of wondering why the identity that Pete wants them to have, they don't seem to be able to attain.
And you're speaking about when you say the identity, are you going back to history and being who they've been in the past? That identity.
I guess what I'm saying is Pete Carroll wants to run the ball. This team's not really running the ball. Pete wants to play great D. This team's not really playing great defense. Certainly they didn't last night. Pete wants them to finish strong. They were great for 3 quarters last night and fell apart in the 4th. And unfortunately, those have been, trends more than one-offs. And I think that's where a lot of the concern in Seattle is today.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand frustration anytime the expectation is to compete to win a division, at the very least, get in, as a wild card. And not that that's over at this point. It's getting tougher. But what I saw last night, and because just looking at film, the previous weeks, at some point you have to realize you can look at calls and you can look at certain aspects and say, what were they thinking here? What were they thinking there? But you also have to realize you're going into that game, you're playing against a team that a lot of people were saying is executing in the last 5 weeks at a different level than anybody else in the NFL, especially at home. I mean, Dak Prescott and that offense, they've been putting up over 40 points on anybody that they play. And so I don't know if it's necessarily, man, what's wrong with Seattle? And I think you're looking at a continuation of the whole season. I'm just looking, at last night compared to who they were on Thanksgiving to what you saw last night. I mean, I think that's closer anyway to what you want to see. And I think at some point we just also have to look at your opponent and say, you're playing a pretty good team that right now is fighting for home field advantage in the NFC. So, it's not perfect. I think the identity was better last night with Abe Lucas back, even though he didn't play the whole game. It just felt like he and Bradford on that right side got back to being okay. I mean, all in all, with Micah Parsons and Dorrance Armstrong and DeMarcus Lawrence and Dante Fowler and Sam Williams, I mean, all in all, I was pretty impressed with the identity of the offense and Geno Smith getting the ball out much quicker, his receivers getting some separation. So I get it. I understand the frustration, but I thought that team battled their asses off. I think Zach Charbonnet stepping in for Kenneth Walker did a nice job. At one point, he goes down. You're playing with DJ Dallas, who's really a special teams guy. Kenny McIntosh isn't ready to go. They've been dealing with offensive line issues all year. So I think sometimes you have to take into consideration the entire picture of the scenario. And not just say, wow, Pete Carroll doesn't know how to coach anymore. I think there's some things that kind of get us to where we are right now with Seattle.
Kirk, can you play elite defense in the NFL today?
It's hard unless you have a Seattle or a Philly defensive line, a San Francisco defensive line, even Dallas. I mean, look at their defensive line. Now, they don't have the interior that I think you see with Philly and San Fran. They're smaller and they're quicker, but it's hard. I understand your point, and I'm with you. There's 2 things that are standing out to me right now. I think we're at an interesting time, Brock, with NFL football. I mean, last night was a little bit of an aberration. I think most often, like next week, we have Pittsburgh and New England. That's a game that in August, you look at that game, you're like, oh wow. Tell you what, we got Dallas, Seattle, then we're going to go to Pittsburgh, New England, and now you look at that and you're like, oh my God. First 1 to 13 wins. It's just we are seeing such a discrepancy between offensive line play in the NFL and defensive linemen and how great and dominant and athletic and big they continue to be. And if you get a right guard with an ankle and a left tackle with a shoulder, and you got to move your right tackle over to left tackle, now we're playing a rookie or an undrafted free agent at right tackle, get a guy off the street to play right guard. I mean, next thing you know, it's a disaster, and I think we see more of that than we see teams like Philly and San Fran and Dallas, where they have a healthy offensive line and continuity. And so it's an interesting time, I think, between that and quarterback play, where everybody wants to say Bryce Young's terrible. Geno Smith doesn't know how to play. Meanwhile, he's the NFL comeback player of the year, got a 3-year contract. All of a sudden, he's forgotten how to play quarterback. I just think that I'm a guy like you that really appreciates offensive line play. And when it's going well, we just kind of ignore it. because we're looking at the quarterback and the receiver and the running back. And when it's going bad, we want to say the quarterback sucks, the offensive coordinator needs to be fired. And I'm just one that anybody who really, really watches and studies it knows that the boys up front dictate the game, whether it's defensive linemen taking over or offensive linemen holding their own and giving the quarterback a chance and the running game a chance. And I just think we're quick in this Twitter world that we live in. We're quick to throw coordinators and quarterbacks under the bus when we don't want to appreciate the way the offensive line, I think, dictate whether you have a good offense or an offense that's struggling.
Well, that's a great lead into the game you're going to call tonight. Kirk Herbstreit joining us, and he does have the Huskies and the Ducks tonight for the Pac-12 Championship. What's the key? Is it up front, as you just said, or are these two quarterbacks just so playing at such an elite level that the focus is entirely on them?
Well, I think it's Washington, getting back to their potential offensively. You guys follow them. I followed them all year just because it seems like we've been calling a lot of their games this year, which I've had a blast doing. But if you go back to when they were playing, and I wasn't comparing them to Burrow and Jamar Chase and Jefferson and that group, but it did feel a little bit like when McMillan's healthy and you got Polk and you got Odunze and you got Dylan Johnson and you got Penix, who just always seemed to have the answer, and the way they were attacking, it made me feel like, man, I mean, these guys, no matter what you're in, they're going to make you pay for it, and they're going to. This kid's accurate, and if he's given time, his vision downfield, he's going to be able to find a matchup, and you can't stay with all three of these receivers. And then they, after the Oregon win, obviously they just kind of have been okay. They've had some good moments, some okay moments, but just not the team that was hitting on all cylinders that we saw early. And now here they come, and a lot of people have come up to me like 9.5 points. Like, what the heck? Washington's undefeated. They already beat Oregon. Like, how are they a 9.5 point? I said, well, I think it has probably a lot to do with the way the teams have looked since they played that game in Seattle. And Oregon wasn't like they played poorly in that game. They just didn't win the game. Missed the last second field goal to tie it. So I think you gotta hope if you're a Washington fan that this offense gets going and has balance, and they're able to get McMillan going in that slot to help out with the shots downfield. Because you can move the ball on Oregon. They're an aggressive team. They're going to challenge you. They're not afraid to leave guys on islands. And you can ask Brock or any quarterback, your eyes light up, and there'll be big opportunities just like there were in that first matchup. So I think Bo Nix is going to get his. I think it's going to be a game that's going to come down to which quarterback is able to not make that critical mistake, because it feels a little bit like a tennis match. Who's going to break serve? I think both teams have a chance to put some points up on the board. And what a great way for the Pac-12 to go out in a Pac-12 championship game. Big audience. These two great teams, which personally I kind of hoped for after we left Husky Stadium. I was like, man, can you imagine if these two teams somehow went out and we get a rematch of this game? So it's here, and I can't wait to call it. And I think we're going to see a similar game that's going to come down to that last possession, which quarterback's able to come through to kind of win this game and advance into the postseason, into the playoffs.
Kirk, at times people ask me, is it hard? Is it hard to call the Apple Cup last week? And is it difficult, when you have familiarity? And I'm like, it really isn't. I mean, I'm not Kirk Herbstreit.
Yeah.
I mean, for Kirk, it's really difficult. Kirk brings Benny on every trip. So for Benny now to connect with Dubs the way he's going to tonight, like he did with Uga down in Georgia, how hard is that for you when you've got that kind of connection with your dog and the Husky?
Oh, my gosh. I wanted him to – ironically, the first time I brought him out was to Husky Stadium in Seattle, and I wanted desperately for him to meet Dubs. And Benny came out for game day, and the crowd was so ruckus. He kind of got up on the set. He said, I think I'm going to go back to the production room. So he went back and hung out, and then I saw Dubs, and I'm like, Dubs, damn, you missed Ben. So I was hoping – and then when I brought him on the field pregame, Dubs was all the way at the end of the field. So I'm hoping that I can connect these guys tonight. He did meet Uga, so he's got to meet Dubs.
How'd he do with Uga?
He did well. Yeah. Ben's, he's a jolly dog. He smiles and he's wagging. But with other dogs, he likes to establish dominance. He's just the way he's wired. So I just have
do
to
that
like
with a bulldog like that?
Yeah, if the other dog is kind of like, hey, I come in peace, I'm a nice dog, then Ben will kind of back down. He just kind of look at him like, all right, as long as you know, then we're okay, you know. So he'll just keep moving on. He'll go back to wagging. But Dubs is a massive dog, so I'm gonna make sure that Ben at 9 years old understands what he's up against.
Any concern about Ben with the duck? Because sometimes dogs and ducks aren't like necessarily great friends.
No, I think Ben will go after. I hope he tackles Puddles. I think that'd be great content for social media.
We know you got to run real quick. Last thing, just because you mentioned you think this comes down to a close game. The Huskies have played a lot of them this year. Oregon's only played 2, and one of them was the loss to the Huskies. If this is a close game, does that favor the Huskies?
Yeah, I think the resiliency and the belief, when it happens once or twice, I don't think that necessarily matters. But when you've been tested and you've had to come up with answers time after time, without a doubt, the closer this thing gets into the second half, into this late in the third, and if we go into the fourth quarter, this thing's within a possession. That's when, if you're Washington, you look around each other on the sideline, you're like, guys, this is where we find out who they are. This is where we take this game over. We've been here all year. Let's go do it. And not to say Oregon can't do that, but I think that's fair that when you have that to fall back on. And I think from a national perspective, I got to keep reminding people about the nastiness of this game, the rivalry. It's easy when it's, in Eugene or in Seattle, but here in Las Vegas, neutral site, NFL stadium, I think it's worth reminding a national audience, this is very similar to Ohio State. What these teams are playing for tonight.
Kirk, thank you. Really appreciate it. What a crazy stretch you have here, going from one place to the next. But the fact that you've given us as much time as you have this year, we really appreciate it. And I just thank God that I have Brock, because obviously you're not coming on with me. I mean, you're coming on with Brock. Let's be clear. So thank you, and thank you to Brock for making sure you book these great guests.
Awesome. Hey, I love coming on with you guys. And if you guys get a W, we'll have to. How great would a Michigan-Washington Rose Bowl be? I mean, how hyped would that be? So we'll have to connect if that happens here.
Sounds pretty good. Kirk, thank you. Enjoy tonight in Vegas, and we'll talk soon, hopefully before a Rose Bowl.
Sounds great, man. Yeah, take care.
Kirk.